Hi and welcome back to the Peter H channel. I haven't made a video with the Yamaha DT125R for quite a while, probably over a year now. That's not to say that I don't still like that bike. Let's just have a look at what I've got today. So I'm in the garage today with a brake caliper, and the piston is stuck in the brake caliper here. Now this brake caliper is on the mounting plate, and I think the mounting plate has had some work on it, like it's had a bolt put in here, as opposed to it sliding on the shaft that's pressed in here. Anyway, that's a different thing. What is of note is the bleed screw has snapped off previously, and someone has put the bleed screw above the banjo bolt, which would work, I suppose. And if we follow the banjo pipe round, we come to the master cylinder. Sorry, the slave cylinder. Here's the master cylinder. So the slave cylinder is still attached. Now what I'm going to do is take the master cylinder off and try and use compressed air to blow that piston forward. This piston hopefully come forward with some compressed air. But what I'm expecting is that the master cylinder here will push out, but there should be a check valve here to stop that pushing all the way out. I'm just looking at this thinking that this pipe might actually blow off here, but what I'll use is this clip here. So it's actually missing a clip here, it should be clipped on. And we'll see how we go. So I'll put this clip there to stop it blowing off there. I don't have an air compressor, but I do have a foot pump, and it's just a basic analog foot pump with a gauge. So one useful thing that comes in the kit of this foot pump, which you're going to need if you've got a motorbike, you've got to keep the tyre pumped up. I mean, you could drive to the garage, ride it to the garage. Anyway, this has got a LILO adapter, which just screws in the end of this, and the LILO adapter easily fits in this rubber hose. You can push it in quite a ways, and I will be holding that by hand when I come to attach it to the foot pump and start pumping, which should force that piston up. Yeah, so there we go on the bench. Had a little bit of residual brake fluid in the pipe there. Now, if I just start, it's not working. We've got a leak. There's a leak from somewhere. Oh no, we don't. See, I've got to hold it in by hand. Just looking at an overview of the situation here. I've had this go off the scale, and the foot pump reading. And what I've done is I've used a Jubilee clip to hold that in place, and this has started to puff up. All the rubber tubing started to puff up. I think it's actually got a leak down here at the slave cylinder, where the brake lever goes. And I've put the bracket holding the brake caliper in a vise here, so that when the piston does come out, I think it's going to come out with quite a pop actually. Can't really see any movement. I don't want to look at it in case it does fly out while I'm looking at it. But what I'm going to do is just heat the back of this with a blowtorch gently. I don't recommend you do this. This is just what I'm going to do as a fairly radical way to get at it, because you could melt the reinforced rubber here, could be damaged. So this is a fairly done in one. Just going to see if this works. I'm just going to use some simple, I've heated it up at the back. things started catching on fire. Just sort of blown a seal here. You can see how swollen up that pipe is. And it's holding it steady about 40 psi. I mean, I had it go off the scale, and it's not even moved a little bit. Hasn't even moved a little bit. I don't think. No, I mean, if it had moved a little bit, it would have moved a lot. Just look at this setup. So it's sort of stuck on 60 psi, sorry, and that's a bit. It's expanded there. Notice some damage on this tube anyway, there where my thumb is. I didn't do that, but I was worried that it wasn't even getting, any pressure was actually getting to the cylinder, so I thought I'd have a look at this bleed screw. That is kind of letting the pressure off, I think. Probably not as much as I would like. Oh yeah, there we go. That's definitely got something coming in the way of pressure there. It's dropped it down to about 40 something. So it just goes to show, you know, you need a shed load of PSI to get these stuck pistons out. So what I'm going to do with this brake piston is push it back in. Which seems, I know it does, trying to get it out, man. You're trying to get it out. You don't want to be pushing it back in. But of course I want to be pushing it back in, because there's obviously something that's binding up in there, whether it's an old piece of corroded seal or even possibly a piece of rust. You know, you never know what it is, but it's something stopping it. So this, either way, it's going to break the seal. It's not going to break the piston or anything, because it can go back. Now, what I'll probably do, let's just push that in. We'll see if I can do it without. There she goes, and going back in now. Look. Pushed it in nearly flush. I should now use the compressed air again. We'll see if we get any change. So I just got the caliper with the piston stuck in, mounted on the vise. It's going to hold the compressed air in. This one, it does go up to 100 psi. Now, if it's any more than 100 psi, it's going to actually be fairly dangerous when it does finally, if it gives up the ghost in a hurry at sort of 120 psi. It's actually very dangerous. So, you know, you may scoff about using something as mediocre as a foot pump, only goes up to 100 psi, but the fact is it's low pressure and it's relatively safe. You know, these high pressure things, they can be pretty dangerous. Well, took it up and it's come out a little bit but not a lot. I'm going to push it back in again. Alright, we've gone off the scale and it stayed in there for some odd reason, and piston's nearly popped out. So it's definitely got some good movement there. It could all give up the ghost any moment. Doesn't seem to be falling. Might be falling a little bit. I've definitely got movement, obviously, because I pushed it nearly flush and it's now nearly a finger out. The question is, to myself, I wonder if I should just you know, put some lubricant on there, penetrating oil, and push it back in and try and push it out again. You know, get a bit of lubrication in there. It's probably, it could pop out with quite force. It's still holding steady at about 100 psi there. Well, she give up. I heard her go with a little. She went with a little whisper, not a pop, and just went with a tiny little. Doing this, you can hear it now. So what's happened is that the seal's broken, but the piston's still in there. Alright, well there she is on the bench there. Obviously need a new piston, I think, because I don't really fancy it. It's covered in old sludge. Actually, I did actually put grease in the back of it at one point, for whatever reason, probably to stop it getting wet in there. So I'll have to check the bores out on this, and it should be pretty good. Get back to you on that. Look at this, on closer inspection. I don't know whether it's supposed to be like that. Looks totally homemade. I mean, it probably isn't, but it's just not very square, is it? Well, you have to take my word for it. If you can't see, it's got indentation there, like clearance for something. Maybe it's supposed to be like that, but it's very worn. A lot of the finish has been worn off, so that's probably what was holding it up. So getting that old brake piston out was definitely a step in the right direction. Now the old rubber seal is in there, kind of goes, seems to be adhered in there somehow. We can get that out. This to save this caliper though, the next step is still a couple of things to do. You see, this I don't think it should be in here, because that should have a rubber boot over it, and so it's stuck in there. It could be epoxied in there. I mean, you know, you just don't know. You don't know how these things are stuck in there, do you? I mean, it's quite hard to get that out. And then the next thing, of course, it's got this broken bleed screw. But I mean, it has got that banjo modification, which could still use that actually. I mean, it's perfectly acceptable. It'd be nice to be able to get that out. I mean, having to get a new banjo bolt. And then lastly, we've got to do something about these. We need to change these rubber boots out. But just stripping this back to a single part would be a good start. So really we need to have a look at what is going on here really, because it probably functions with this, but it's not very good. It's not what was intended by Yamaha, for example. And it's always good to stick with the manufacturer's recommended, especially when you're dealing with brakes, you know. So it's, you know, it functions as a caliper, but you know, you don't really want it, especially if you're going to sell it on to someone. You want it to be as stock as possible. So that's all for today. Thanks for tuning in.